Well, thank you all for joining me today. And I'm here to talk about container gardening and give you some tips. And we can also feel free to ask questions along the way. Happy to answer questions. So who all is already a container gardener? Okay, great. Well, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I come to an amazing nursery like this, I will just get kind of overwhelmed by all the options and just spend way too long wandering around trying to pick things, and then I'll come home and have completely disparate collection of plants that don't necessarily all want to be together. So hopefully some of the tips I can give you today will maybe rein that in a bit. And so one thing that I have found that helps me is if I know the container I'm using and the location beforehand. And sometimes it doesn't work that way, but that always will help me deciding what I need to get. And another thing, because my background, well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself too. My name is Lana Williams, and I have a little plant business in Oakland called The Tender Gardener. And I have a little greenhouse and sell house plants mostly out of that. And we deliver around the Bay Area, but then also have a garden design business where I do more landscape and container gardening for people. And I started that in 2020, kind of right as the pandemic hit. And so it kind of shaped the course of it to being at the beginning more online and doing delivery, which was great for that time. And because it's a small business, it's been able to kind of evolve with my interests over time. And then this year in May, my book was published. That was really fun and exciting to write, because really my start to container gardening was when I moved to California. I studied art and went to San Francisco Art Institute to study painting. And I grew up in Arkansas and was used to having a lot more space in a way, or kind of just plants all around in my home environment. But then I moved into an apartment, didn't have any outdoor space, and my stepdad gave me a book on container gardening. And so I started putting pots on my fire escape, which probably wasn't the best, and on my neighbor's rooftop out a window. And that kind of got me hooked on container gardening. And so it was kind of a nice connection to have then this book to be on container gardening, which really I feel was a foundational and access point to my love of plants. And I also, this is my book, yeah. And also feel container gardening in a way, there's less high stakes. A lot of times when I'm planting something in the ground, I can be feel that's it, even though as gardeners, we can move them around. But in containers, a lot of times they're annuals, that you're going to be changing things out, and there's less pressure. Commitment, yeah. So it's really fun, and as an entry point for people that are new to gardening, I feel it's accessible. But then all gardeners who are 30 years gardeners, they all also have container gardens because it's so fun. So it was really exciting to get to write this book on container gardening. And so back to kind of picking out the plants and the pots. With my background in painting, one other strategy I often like to start with is a color palette. And sometimes that'll be from a painting that I like. And that can really help me kind of narrow my focus when I get to a nursery. And then in the book, I talk about the different sort of roles plants play in a container. And you can apply these to like an individual pot, or a lot of times you will have multiple containers grouped together. And so you want to continue to think about these like design principles. So for example, like I love bowl-shaped containers in particular, so that's why I chose this today. But like if I had a bowl like this and was wanting to pair it with some other pots, I would want to choose different shapes and heights. That way each arrangement or individual plant in the pot would have its moment and like be able to be seen. And I always feel like groups of 3 or odd numbers tend to be more visually interesting than if you have like 2 pots of the exact same plants, all the exact same height. So you want to like very height, very color, very texture. When you're grouping the different plants together, try to like pick plants that have different shaped leaves. That way each one can easily be seen, instead of in like different heights, instead of things that are like so similar. And that will kind of make your arrangements more interesting. And so several categories I break down in the book of like what you think about. Some are like the classic thrillers, fillers, and spillers. I'm sure you all have heard. So like, for example, this beautiful begonia is going to be a thriller in an arrangement, and just because of these like spectacular vermilion blooms. And then like this feverfew would be like a more of a filler type of plant. And a lot of times I like to use ferns as fillers, or grasses are excellent fillers. And these are like the kind of supporting roles in your arrangement. And then you have the spillers that are going to be trailing down the sides of the pot. And one thing that I like to use a lot that in my containers for not only like helping keep moisture in, but also they sometimes spill, but is more like ground covers, which I feel like are a little bit underappreciated in container gardens. But these can really kind of fill out the negative space and help keep moisture in. So some that are fun is like the Diamondia silver carpet, which is often used in like landscaping, and or sedums, which are really like cool and make a nice dense mat, and will just kind of like spread into the empty spaces. So and I think today we'll use some of that in the arrangement. And another one that I highlight in the book is like Scotch moss and Irish moss, which are like really nice, like love mosses. They just like beg me to kind of pet them. And so, yeah, those are really fun to like use as creating negative space, but also still having some like green foliage in their arrangement. And sometimes when I'm like designing arrangements, I also am thinking about the negative space, and that's maybe my like painterly artist background. But so like this, for example, like you're getting lots of kind of negative spaces between the flowers. So I like having that kind of gaps and like airiness and moments for breath, whereas like these coleus tend to be more like bushy and full. But if you put these together, I want to try to like not make the entire, this is filling up more like a filler, where this would be more of our like thriller with these nice long flowers. And then I would want something else that's like maybe lower, to not have too much like filler and have more of a dynamic feeling, which maybe like you would do something lower, although, which brings me into thinking about other important things when making your container arrangements, which, well, drainage is one of the most important things when you're selecting your pot. You always want to make sure there's drain holes. And if there's not holes in your pot, I would recommend drilling a hole in the pot. And if you go to the hardware store and ask like which kind of drill bit to get, if it's for a ceramic pot or metal or whatever, they can help you. And unless it's like one that is like super beloved and like you would be very upset if it broke, then I would say just go for it with the right drill bit, and you probably will have success. Yeah.
One hole in the bottom enough?
It depends on the size of your pot. So like a pot this size, yes, one hole will be good. And then I also, this is like kind of a controversial like topic of like, do you put crocks or rocks over the drain hole? And my philosophy is a pot this size, no, like I might put a little mesh over it, which is just like a little circle, depending on where you put it. Like if this was going to go on a table or something, then definitely I'd want this, which will help kind of keep the soil from washing away and getting dirt everywhere. Just a little piece of mesh. And I would just stick that right over the drain hole. But what I find when I like to use a couple rocks or one like nice crock that has like a good curve to it is when I'm using a really big container, because the weight of the soil and the plant and the water is what will compact that drain hole. And then that's when it becomes a problem because you're not getting like good drainage. And for really large pots, like, yeah, you want to make sure the hole is even also larger, or it has multiple holes, and that will always help. And then when you're placing your containers, like if you have a wood deck or something, you're going to want to like use little feet to help keep the water able to like evaporate and not rot the wood. But if it's on concrete or something, you can just set it right directly on the ground or on gravel or something. And then if it's a plant that really loves moisture, you can also use saucers. But then in the winter, I would say I usually take all my saucers away because we have rainy season and things will just be like super saturated and go to mush. But so those are like the tips on, yeah, my thoughts on crocks and rocks. And anyone out here like have a contrasting or a differing opinion? No. Yeah.
I remember reading like years ago where you take a piece of clay, like a plant, from a plant pot,
Yeah.
and you put it like sort of in the hole,
Yeah.
over it. You know,
So
there's
yes,
airspace,
exactly.
There's space for water, but it's in there. Is that?
So you could wedge it in the hole a little bit. I usually, when I'm using a crock, we'll get the curved part of the pot that's broken and kind of like make a little, like, I don't know, dome over the hole.
Okay.
And then sometimes you could like stack two together so the airflow and water can find its way out, but the soil will hopefully not like get in there and jam it up. And then, so that's kind of how I pick the pots. And
I have another question about pot size.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what we're talking about.
Like, I would have thought that is too small to put 3 things. Like, isn't that kind of like not allowing them to really develop the like full roots that would make them thriving? Or how do you think about that?
So I would say yes. If you plant multiple things in this, it will keep them small, but that could be like what you want for that arrangement. one plant in here, any of these would be a beautiful plant and it would be able to grow and look nice. But sometimes like you want to have like a mixed arrangement. And so you can break the rules and squish them together and they will not just grow to be like as large as they could be. But they will be able to live. And then eventually, yeah, you might want to repop them into the garden or into their own plant, but it doesn't mean you can't like make them.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't, yeah.
I think I've been discouraged from that, but it sounds like.
Yeah, I would say, there's not really study rules, or you can always break the rules. And they won't reach their like full size for sure, because they will get cramped, but they can like still exist that way.
I guess I'd be worried if it's so shallow.
Yeah, so that's the thing about,
That they'll get root bound.
yeah, quickly, yeah. With the bowl, yeah, you do have to be like a little bit more careful and try to pick a little bit deeper bowls or things that have shallower roots or can tolerate like being a little bit root bound. Or it might be like an arrangement you have for a season and then you say, okay, these I'm going to either upgrade to a larger pot, create something different. So that's kind of how I think about it in bowls.
How do you find out the information about like how much root depth and those types of parameters that each plant needs?
Well, one just kind of like basic thing to look at if you don't have access to that information right away is to look at the type of roots. So like a fibrous root system versus a taproot. Okay. Taproots definitely aren't going to be happy in a bowl. But a more fibrous root system can tolerate that because it can spread out more and it's not going to be going down. So that's kind of like a basic thing to follow. But then a lot of times too, you might consider like the height of the plant. So a lot of times their roots are kind of like mirror the growth. So if it's going to get like 2 feet tall, it might need 2 feet below. So when you're looking for plants for containers, also you might see one that you love and it says it's going to get 5 feet. Well, probably not the best for the container. But if you look right next to it, you might find a dwarf variety or like a variety that has been bred for containers. So, and especially a place like this where there's like so many different varieties and specialized plants, it's great to find those kind of options. But like I said, yeah, you can break the rules, put something in it, it just won't reach its full potential in a container. So, and when you're picking out plants, also like you want to pick some that aren't super root bound already, like kind of getting one in between. And Annie's has lots of nice signs to help. Whereas like sometimes you might be drawn to like the one with the most flowers open, but it's better to like get the one with the buds and then give yourself like couple of weeks and soon you'll have a bunch of flowers and you'll tend to enjoy the flowers longer that way as well. Yeah.
You did have something that was root bound and you want to transplant it. Like how safe is it to cut away
the roots? It's always with outdoor plants, you can, loosen up the roots with, let's look at some of these and see if we've got an example. Oh yeah, look at that. Very root bound. So this, I would for sure like untangle these roots and loosen them up. And a lot of times when you break the roots, you're going to be stimulating new root growth. Don't do this with your houseplants though. They won't like it as much. But I would say in a situation like that, yeah, you're going to want to break those roots up. probably not like chop them all off unless it was like a super dense mat. Like sometimes you'll see that it's like completely grown and they're dried anyway, just rip that off. So yeah, don't be afraid to kind of like manipulate them a bit, and I'll show you that as we get going. So what else was I going to say about different plants? So we did the thrillers, fillers, spillers. Then there's like the colors to think about. And you have like the dark, dramatic foliage, which is always fun. Or you have the blue, kind of like glaucous, silvery foliage. And then you have always got like the nice chartreuse, lime green color. And then colors, like the whole color palette of flowers, which is always fun. And then some plants like coleus or caladiums have just like really colorful foliage, and you could make a whole arrangement with just foliage plants, no flowers, which I also like doing, and have some examples in the book of that. So yeah, any questions so far? Or I'll start kind of making this arrangement today. So, yes.
I have containers like you have over there, like your storage containers.
Oh, yeah.
Big ones like that.
Yeah.
And drill holes around the side at the bottom to drain out. And I was wondering if I drill up, kind of get airflow.
I wouldn't say you have to drill up the sides. I would say on the bottom is probably the best. But that is a great example of like an unusual container that you could definitely plant in. And that's also the cool thing about container gardening is almost anything can be like turned into a container. And I have a chapter in here on unconventional pots. Yeah, that's definitely something you can use, and I would put holes in the bottom, but like multiple ones, like in maybe 3 rows or something. All right, then another thing you have to think about, we were talking about, so yeah, couple of questions. How often do you need to fertilize? Well, that will also depend on the plant, but I would say like at least once a month, if not every 2 weeks, would be like, for flowering plants, would be like to keep them really happy and going, especially in like a smaller pot. And what I like to use for fertilizer is a lot of times just like worm castings that I will sprinkle on the top of the soil. And then every time I water, it's like getting that nutrients and feeding the plants. And you could also mix some in when you are planting them as well. And that's just in summer. Then once things are like not flowering, or in spring, then you would not want to fertilize unless you have like winter flowering plants like cyclamen or things like that you would want to keep fertilizing while they're flowering. But other key principles when making containers is the needs of the plants all have to like be in line. So you can't put like water loving and drought tolerant plants in the same pot, or they aren't going to be happy, or shade loving and sun loving. So that's kind of like the other puzzle piece to figure out when you're selecting your plants. It's like, will they like the same conditions? And that's, will help all of your container arrangements thrive. So let's get going with this one. And then soil, is another thing we'll talk about. So I have my little mesh I'm going to put down.
Can you show us that mesh?
Yeah.
I couldn't even see it.
You can't probably see, like I'm holding something invisible, but there is mesh. That's a good idea. There. Okay. Yeah, just a little piece of mesh. And that's just like, I wouldn't say you have to do that at all, but it will help hold the soil in. And so then when I'm planting a container, I always like to start with my like largest plant first. Here at Annie's, we have pretty much 4-inch plants, so they're all going to be the same size. But if I had like a larger plant, I would put a little bit of soil in. And then my kind of general rule is I like to keep things about 1 inch below the rim. That way, when I water the plant, the soil isn't like spilling all out. Unless, for example, I'm like planting something where intentionally I want it to be lined up with the edge because I want like these sedums, I might want to actually make this arrangement a little bit higher so they can easily start to like climb over the edge. And so you can like put a layer of soil in and then set your plant in before you pop it out of its pot and see if you're at the right depth. And might add just a little bit more. Yes. So this soil I'm using is really just a like general potting soil. And so basically this you'll use like a regular potting soil or a succulent and cactus mix, kind of like the two most popular ones. So
What did you say?
a succulent and cactus mix, yeah. And that's going to be a soil that has like a lot more grit and drainage. And so sometimes I'll mix that in with other plants that like good drainage, like a lot of times grasses, depending on the grass, like a lot of good drainage. But other like really moisture loving plants, just potting soil, or if you found one with cocoa coir, I really like those types of potting soils, and they really retain moisture well. So for all your like plants that need lots of water, especially at this time of year, like it's really hot, that really helps keep the moisture in longer. And then you have like terracotta pots also are going to let water escape, whereas a glazed pot is going to hold the water in because these are porous, so the water will kind of evaporate more. So if you have a drought tolerant plant or like a plant that doesn't like to retain a lot of water, then I would recommend like a terracotta pot.
I have like really, really large terracotta pots that don't have hole at the bottom.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think you can reel those, can you?
You can drill, but you would want to get a ceramic drill bit. But yes, and
Wait, can you say that again? Why the drought loving is good for terracotta?
terracotta like will soak in moisture, so it will help like pull out the water from the soil. Yeah, and then it evaporates, so they dry out much quicker than like a glazed pot. Okay, so a plant I love is heuchera, coral bells, and they have like these really long lasting flower spikes. And I also love, they come in a bunch of different colors, and there's like a beautiful native one that we have, and then there's lots of different hybrids that are fun as well. Also, I'm wanting to make an arrangement today. A lot of times when we think of container gardening, you think of annuals, but I also like to use a lot of perennials. And in California, like they will just grow year round. So it's fun to use perennials. Okay, this is kind of a dense mat of roots, so I will kind of like just break it up a little bit with my fingers. You can use gloves, but don't use gloves often unless I'm using like a spiky cactus. Okay, so I'm going to use this today, and then trying to see. So this is a fescue, and these are also really fun to use, and they look beautiful like by themselves in a pot mixed with other plants. But I also like to use them mixed in with like succulents. Just gives them the like arrangement less rigidity and more like some flow. And so this is going to be really too big to mix in the way I want to, so I'm going to divide it. So you really don't have to be scared. You just can get your hands in there and then pull it apart. Yeah, and now we have 2 plants. Well, let's make more. So I'm going to divide it again. Kind of just grab it, and then the roots kind of untangle themselves. So that's more of a usable size. I'm going to do once again. So now we have 4 little baby plants.
I have a silly question.
Yeah.
If you were just the fescue, would you divide it like that?
No, I would probably just plant it right in the middle, and then fill in with soil. And yeah, I have one just by itself in a pot, and they're really beautiful and fun. Okay, so I'm going to use these. Well, might wait to put that in. I'm thinking I want to use this sedum for sure to kind of like, I love the way the like green picks up the subtle green in this plant. And my like idea and inspiration today was thinking about, we're going into fall. It's kind of like sadly end of summer. So picking a color palette that is like a little bit of like fall, but not too like autumn yet. Let's see, might mix in. Also love these just sedums, or why am I spurge? Why am I blanking on the name? Euphorbias. And these also come in a bunch of different colors, and I like to use them in containers because they almost have a bit more of like an architectural feel with the long stems, and then they usually send out gorgeous like chartreuse flowers or yellow flowers, and then you'll want to cut them kind of all the way back after they flower, but by then they'll have put out all these like little babies of new growth. But they're fun to mix in arrangements. I think we'll try using, this one's really big. Let's go with a smaller one. And this one doesn't have like half the dirt still in here because it has a really baby root system right now. So we actually need to add more dirt before we get that one in there. Otherwise it would be sitting too low. And it's really important when you plant to make sure you don't plant above or below where the plant already is like growing in the soil. So if you like were to put soil up to here, that's no good. It's going to lead to stem rot because when you water the plant, it will like get all soggy and the stems will rot. You want to always like keep it kind of at the like crown where the roots and the base of the plant meet. And you never want to plant like with half the like a little bit of the roots sticking out either, because that will dry out the plant. So always try to get everything like lined up the correct level. That's why sometimes you have to like keep adding soil or removing soil. And you always want to look at the direction of the plants too, like and find like the most aesthetic viewpoint. And you can also, don't be scared to like, if you wanted to plant this more like facing outward, you could do that as well. Maybe we'll try that. Need more soil. I did. Can I ask a question? Okay. Thank you.
That cedar we can just divide too.
Yes, you can. Yeah, easily. And then put it like, yeah, maybe we'll take a little bit actually and stick it on this back side that way, and you'd have some kind of trailing down the back, front, like your idea. Take a little cluster. And these are real pretty hardy. So then, once you get everything in, you have a million little holes. Very important to fill all these holes. They always take more soil than you think. So you gotta like use your fingers and really shove it down there, because plants don't like to have air gaps around their roots. So you want to make sure you're getting soil in all the different spots.
You're just using potting soil with succulents.
I
Not
am.
using heavy soil. Does that work?
It will work, but I would say we could have used either or in this situation, or mixed them, because you have the grasses and the heuchera. But that will just mean we probably don't have to water it as frequently because it's going to retain moisture. But this is this potting soil is called the Recipe 420, and I find that these will be okay with them.
It kind of acts like, I mean, it has enough bark. Like
Yeah,
material
it has
and,
enough kind of like mulchy material inside. There we go. I have some edibles in there, but I don't have like its own section on edibles. But happy to answer questions. I do have my own raised garden beds.
Varmints.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That's why we have so many things.
Yeah.
We have so many goats.
Gophers. Those are
Raccoons.
raccoons.
Squirrels.
Yeah. They're all there.
Ants.
They love your garden.
It's Richmond. It's a tough neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, you can try planting some things that like they don't like with them, like marigolds. A lot of times they don't like the smell of that. Mint, which really mint you don't want to plant in like ground because it'll spread. But there is a native that I like called yerba buena, which does spread, but it's not like the other kind of mint. Well, gophers actually don't like spurge, particularly one variety, forgetting which one, but there's this one of these that they really just, euphorbia. And because their sap is toxic, of these euphorbias, the gophers don't like them. So yeah, you want to make sure you get all the holes, kind of like press the soil down. And then always, the most important step in the end is to water them in, because that will help all of the little tiny air gaps kind of like go away as the soil sort of settles into place. And then you could, I think this will be, can't see how it looks from that away. I tried to make it for y'all. But yeah, then this will eventually kind of all fill out a bit, but still it won't ever get too huge. I would say the heuchera and the grasses will kind of grow the most. These don't get too big, so then hopefully the sedum just kind of fills in all the gaps. And that's the fun kind of perennial container that will go and go and go until you decide to pop them out and plant them in the ground. But, question?
Questions?
Yeah.
One, where did you get your scoop?
My scoop. I know, I love my scoop. I think I got it on Etsy, maybe. Yeah. I'm always like looking for cool vintage balls, watering cans, and cool like scoops and bins for soil and things like that. Another question?
Soil compaction. How do you recommend?
Well, yes, so that's one thing that if it does seem like it's getting too dense, you can always like jab a stick or something in there, which will help aerate the soil and loosen it up a bit. And then one thing, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, or like sometimes you'll notice like, oh, I planted these like an inch below the rim, but now all of a sudden it's like 5 inches low and like the plants are like hiding in the pot. That's just because like the plants have used all that nutrients from the soil, and you need to like take the plants out, add more soil, and repot the plants, and that will help your plant have more nutrients, and also, over time, like the soil just completely depletes of nutrients. So, like even if after a year, like I would say, refresh your potting soil in your container. And if it's like you have a tree planted in a container, a really large plant that's hard to do that, you can always like dig down a couple of inches and then add soil just to help the plant out. Or like, yeah, it might be a 2-person job to like pull the tree out, add some soil at the bottom, and then replant it. And that will just really help with the longevity of the plant living in a container. And then if it is like planting a tree in a container, say that it's gotten like really big, one way you can like keep them small is by removing like the bottom like third of the root ball and then putting soil in and keeping it kind of like stunted in a way. And that's kind of a way if you wanted to grow like a bigger tree in a pot. But you want a big pot.
When you see the roots kind of above the soil, should I just add more soil on? I think over time, it's like,
if you're seeing the roots on the soil, you can add some soil, but you also don't want to add too much where you're like going to be covering up this like trunk or stem, because then you end up going back to that stem rot problem. So it's a delicate balance of kind of like knowing, well, where has the soil eroded, and you don't want to have the bare roots showing, but you also don't want to like add like several inches of soil where then you're covering up the stem.
would you add the soil around maybe the edge?
You want it to be kind of even, so you could add just, you could dig around a little bit around the edges so you could add more soil, but then just add like a thinner layer over the top. Other questions? Yeah.
How do you handle plants that are starting in peats?
Yeah.
Do you break it up a lot, the roots up a lot, or how did you, because that could dry out and then the surrounding soil.
Yes.
But it doesn't.
Yes. Good question. So you would definitely want to have it moist when you are trying to plant it, and then I would try to break it up and like tease out as much as you can without like damaging the root system, because it will dry out at a much faster rate than like the regular soil.
I know we're talking about plants today. Do you talk about vegetables at all in your book?
I talk more about plants, more ornamental plants than vegetables. There are a couple projects. The way the book is written is like it's a recipe book. So I have like a whole introduction that's going over like a lot of the like basics. We didn't really get into like how you take care of the plants once you planted them, and like best practices of deadheading and checking for pests. And when you water your plants, you always want to make sure you water like the entire pot.
So all of the root balls get water. Don't just like put your watering can or your hose in one spot and that's the only little spot that will get water. You want to make sure like all the plants are getting water. So I go over kind of all of that kind of information, and then the rest of the book is I have like 57 projects of like different arrangements, and it's grouped by like hanging baskets, window boxes, urns, bowls, unconventional containers. Yeah, people are welcome to check it out too. But, yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for tuning in today. So now